They'll also take up the rule this morning for what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. They'll have an hour of debate on the rule for that and votes later on as well. Likely we'll hear more, too, about the unemployment rate. The Labor Department saying this morning the economy added 216,000 new jobs. Labor Department reporting the unemployment rate dropping to 8.8%. The House is in. We go to it live here on C-SPAN.
Mr. Speaker, the work ethics of the people of my district give me great optimism despite the daily reminders that our nation teeters on the edge of bankruptcy. Individual Americans are rich in spirit, tradition, and innovation, but as a country, we're broke, all because the federal government has maxed out its credit card. This House is listening to the American people, and we have passed legislation representing significant spending cuts of historic proportions. But Harry Reid and the President are not listening. Instead, they're threatening to shut down the government. Now, they'll try to shift the blame and deny that America's economic problems are the result of their failed policies. I believe America's ready for some tough spending decisions. We must give Americans the tools to grow the economy instead of growing government. I hope my fellow colleagues will join me in asking two questions when any spending bill comes before this House. How much is it going to cost, and who's going to pay for it? And if we can't afford it, and if the American taxpayer is going to foot the bill, we should be voting a resounding no. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in celebration of Women's History Month and to honor a very special hero stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. First Lieutenant Candace Killian of the 58th Training Squadron is our nation's first female pilot of the CV-22, also known as the Osprey. It's an elite honor for any pilot to fly the CV-22, and it's particularly unique to be the first woman in history to do so. Unfortunately, the contributions that women make to our military and our nation don't always get their due recognition, so it's a very special honor for me today to recognize First Lieutenant Killian as part of Women's History Month. I continue to be inspired by the great sacrifices made by leaders like First Lieutenant Killian in service to our nation. Congratulations to First Lieutenant Killian and her distinguished service and sacrifice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1281, the Restoring Economic Certainty Act of 2011. This bill places a 24-month moratorium on the majority of new regulations promulgated by agencies, giving small businesses the certainty required to create jobs. The goal of this bill is to provide confidence to small businesses, which create the overwhelming majority of jobs in America. I'm calling on Congress to enact a regulatory cooling-off period. Let's give America's small businesses a chance to catch their breath from the over 23,000 rules and tens of thousands of pages of regulations that have been enacted since 2004. As a business owner myself, I've seen firsthand the harmful impact that government regulations and uncertainty can have on job creation. Job creators have to know that they won't be punished by unelected federal bureaucrats with additional rules, regulations, and red tape. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of H.R. 1281 today. Let's send job creators a clear signal that we're not going to allow government to be an impediment to business growth. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
To address House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, how soon we forget. During the last congressional session, then Minority Leader Boehner called Deem and passed bills a scheme and a plot, one that has employed immediately upon assuming the speakership. It's doubly ironic because this particular Deem and pass bill is blatantly unconstitutional, as it eliminates the Senate and President from the legislative process. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 of the Constitution reads, "Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate, shall, before it becomes law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves, he signs it, but if not, he shall return it. This deemed and passed spending bill would eliminate the inconvenience of the United States Senate passing or the President signing H.R. 1, the radical Republican proposal to eliminate 700,000 to 900,000 jobs. Whether or not Republicans ram it down our throats today is probably irrelevant, since it is clearly unconstitutional, but we should vote it down as a matter of constitutional principle. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask permission to address the House 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, Democrats in the Senate should work with Republicans to act on the continuing resolution. House Republicans successfully passed a bill over 40 days ago, and Senate Democrats have still not acted. Liberals in the Senate claim to have a plan of their own. Rather than voting on this plan, Senate Democrats have resorted to petty political gamesmanship. Conservatives won the election in November. The American people spoke clearly. They want to put a halt to reckless spending. This is the conservative position in Congress. Any compromise should incorporate views of the American people. The Tea Party has made a difference. While liberals are encouraging a government shutdown, conservatives in Congress have passed a bill that would avoid this event. Leaders are expected to make tough decisions in difficult times. Continuing one-line gimmicks to curry political favor is another political ploy in Washington that liberals are just out of touch with America. The American people know that reckless borrowing is a threat to American families. Young people know debts are being passed to them. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
I rise to address the House for 1 minute. That's permission.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise this morning in objection to the Republican leadership's blatant disregard for the Constitution. Republicans' partisan extremism reached a new low this week with the willingness to ignore some of the most basic fundamentals of our Constitution. They have come up with a scheme called Deem and Pass. I am outraged that the Republicans could believe that their budget, their job-killing budget, could become law with just the approval of the House of Representatives. Every American should be offended by such an extreme, reckless, and clearly unconstitutional scheme. Madam Speaker, Americans want Congress to move beyond the partisan extremism and political theater. It's time to negotiate a budget in good faith that invests in our future, protect our families, and help move America toward greater economic recovery and prosperity. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise the Senate.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This past Friday, I had the privilege to attend a ceremony before 4,000 midshipmen at Annapolis, honoring 4 distinguished graduates of the Naval Academy for their lifelong achievements and dedication to the United States Navy, Marine Corps, and indeed to our nation. Dr. Bradford Parkinson, the class of 1957, dedicated his life and effort to develop the global positioning system. Lieutenant General Matthew Cooper, class of 1958, served 2 tours in Vietnam as a commander in the Marine Corps Ground Reserve in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and turned around the Toys for Tots Foundation. Mr. Corbin McNeil, class of 1962, served for over 20 years in the submarine service and later became the chairman and co-CEO of Exelon Corporation, headquartered in Illinois. The 4th honoree holds a special place in my heart and the heart of my family. It's Rear Admiral Robert Harper Shoemaker, class of 1956, my Uncle Bob. Mr. Speaker, upon graduation from the Naval Academy, my uncle attended flight school and began his service in the United States Navy. On February 11, 1965, flying his F-8 Crusader, he was shot down over North Vietnam and was taken prisoner by the North Vietnamese. For over 8 years, he was held prisoner in many of those years in the Hanoi Hilton, a name which he actually dubbed that prison camp. Madam Speaker, my Uncle Bob has always served as an inspiration to me and to countless others. I was honored to see this special award bestowed upon him this past week, and I want to take this time to thank him and his fellow award recipients for their service not only to the Naval Academy, the Marine Corps, but to our nation. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to encourage the President and leaders of the House and Senate to work together to craft a long-term spending plan to prevent a government shutdown and get our nation's finances back on track. No business can thrive without a stable, long-term financial plan. The federal government can't either. The uncertainty we're operating under is costly to taxpayers, and it threatens the health of both the public and the private sectors. As I travel around my district, I hear time and again from constituents who are tired of the heated political rhetoric. We can cater to political extremes, or we can work together to resolve pressing issues. Let's move beyond the weekly battles on discretionary spending and start an adult conversation about the real structural issues that plague our nation's fiscal health. Thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Ask for permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of one of America's great military heroes, Lieutenant General Solomon Willard Wells, or Jim as he was known to his family. General Wells passed away in December at the age of 94 after a lifetime of distinguished service to his country. Today, his friends, family, and loved ones will gather to celebrate his amazing life at a special service near his home in California. Among those will be his children, and 3 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, there's no way I could do justice to all the achievements of this amazing man in the time I have here. Jim first earned his wings in 1941 and went on to log over 12,000 hours of flying time as a command pilot with over 700 hours of combat time. He flew hundreds of missions during 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and has been honored with almost every medal imaginable. After commanding all forces all over the world, he culminated his military career as an Inspector General of the Air Force here in Washington. Today, I would like to join with my colleagues here in the U.S. House of Representatives to express to Jim's family and loved ones our heartfelt sympathy on his loss and our sincere gratitude for his service to the nation he loved. Mr. Speaker, during his service today, it was the hope of many that General Wells would be honored by a military flyover. I am disappointed to say that the Air Force was unable to accommodate this wish, but I know there is no military airman in America who does not join us in honoring the memory of this hero, and if anyone would understand the logistical challenges of command, it would be Jim. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, here we go again. We're 1 week away from a government shutdown. I, for one, wish we could focus on creating jobs and growing the economy. But instead, the majority can't even agree on how to keep the doors open. In fact, unwilling to compromise and unable to break free of the clutches of the Tea Party, they have tried a stunt that is beyond belief. It's altogether fitting that we are debating this absurd measure today on April Fool's Day. Why? Because after reading the Constitution on the floor of this body just weeks ago, they are ignoring our founding document, mocking its principles, and attempting to circumvent 222 years of history. What do they want to do? Say that any bill that passes this House is good enough. No need for the Senate or President. It should just become law, like magic. This country was founded on checks and balances and limited government. Instead of desperate attempts to ram through job-destroying legislation to appease the extreme wing of their party, perhaps the majority in this House could try negotiating in good faith with the Senate and our President to keep the lights on. After all, that's the least the American public expects of their elected officials. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 194 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 24, House Resolution 194. Resolved that upon the adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 1255, to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill to final passage without intervening motion except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the Majority Leader and Minority Leader or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Madam Speaker, I raise a point of order against ACE Res 194 because the resolution violates Section 426A of the Congressional Budget Act. The resolution contains a waiver of all points of order against consideration of the bill, which includes a waiver of Section 425 of the Congressional Budget Act, which causes a violation of Section 426A.
The gentleman from Minnesota has made a point of order that the resolution violates Section 426A of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974. The gentleman has met the threshold burden under the rule, and the gentleman from Minnesota and a member opposed each will control 10 minutes of debate on the question of consideration. Following debate, the chair will put the question of consideration as a statutory means of disposing of the point of order. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota.
I thank the chair. Madam Speaker, I raise this point of order not necessarily out of concern for unfunded mandates, although there are likely many in this bill. I raise a point of order because it's the only vehicle we've got to actually talk about this rule and this bill and how we're being denied the ability to actually offer the amendments that we would like to illuminate what's actually in this bill. Republicans are playing partisan political games with America's future, America's seniors, and America's veterans with the following: with America's government. Since taking control of Congress over 13 weeks ago, Republicans have failed to introduce a single bill, not one single bill, to create one single job. Instead, the Republican majority has hatched an unconstitutional scheme to fire nearly 1 million Americans and foreclose on the middle class. Madam Speaker, I think it's ironic that today is April Fool's Day because the Republican majority is playing April Fool's joke on the American people. This unconstitutional Washington tricknology and trickeration reflected in the underlying bill would destroy at least 700,000 jobs, according to the Economic Policy Institute, Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Economics, and even Goldman Sachs. Let's be clear. The underlying bill, which Mr. Woodall is a co-sponsor, implies that the Senate has passed a bill which has already failed there. It assumes or deems that the President has signed a bill which he threatened to veto. April Fool's America, there is no Senate or Office of Presidency today under the Republican majority bill. The Republican spending bill badly damages our fragile economic recovery, according to 300 economists of all political stripes, and threatens to send us spiraling into another Republican recession. And as we have heard earlier this week, the Republican answer to 14 million Americans who lost their jobs and can't find new ones is stop talking about jobs. So, at this time, I'd like to yield. This time, I'd like to yield to the gentleman, Mr. Woodall, for 15 seconds to ask him just a simple question.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'd be happy to answer that question.
I'd like to ask the gentleman, how many jobs does this bill create?
By eliminating the crushing federal deficit that we have today, by taking the first steps we've seen in a generation to take the government out of capital markets and put the private sector back in?
I'll reclaim my time. I do appreciate the gentleman's decision not to answer my question, because
I'd be happy to try again, Mr. Ellison.
I have the time, and I reclaimed it. And I do appreciate the gentleman's decision not to answer how many jobs this bill is going to create, because it certainly creates none. In fact, it destroys jobs, and it's really a shame. And I think that if the gentleman would want to give us a number, even an estimate, just some sort of a estimate as to how many jobs this bill was going to create, we certainly could have a good dialogue about how America goes forward. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, the gentleman cannot answer that question because the Republican majority has been exposed. They have a no-jobs agenda, and this bill they propose to deem and pass today would cut upwards of 1 million jobs and as low as 700,000. This is a no-jobs agenda. So at this time, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Paul Tonka, I believe, would like to, I'll reserve the balance of, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, this Republican April Fool's resolution on the House floor today seems to look for a waiver of all points of order against consideration of the bill, which includes the waiver of Section 425 of the Congressional Budget Act, which causes a violation, we believe, of 426A, Section 426A. I'm not sure if the rules of the House are declared null and void on any April Fool's Day, but I have a feeling that we're about to see that happen today on the floor. Apparently, the new Republican leadership and their majority believe that they can take control of a parliamentary system. Unfortunately for them, we still have a bicameral legislature, including a United States Senate and a Constitution that requires the President of the United States to sign legislation. So the rules seem to be changing every day around here. I thought we were going to see bills 72 hours in advance. The bills would have to be paid for under the Republican cut-go measure, and that all bills, again, all bills would have to meet a constitutional test before the floor considers it. In the last 2 weeks, we've violated every one of these principles. There are likely some unfunded mandates in this measure. I raise a point of order because this is the only way that we have to debate this bill, and we're being denied the ability to actually offer the amendments that we would like to illuminate rather what's actually in this legislation and how this is a break again from the hallmark and tradition of this great House, which is to allow open debate on appropriations bills. So, in conclusion, we simply cannot trash the rules of the House like we are doing here today and, ironically, on April Fool's Day. Thank you.
Gentleman
I yield
from
back.
Minnesota.
May I inquire as to time?
Gentleman from Minnesota has 4 minutes remaining.
I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I rise to claim time in opposition to the point of order and in favor of consideration of the resolution.
Gentleman is recognized for 10 minutes.
It appears, Madam Speaker, that this is going to be an April Fool's Day themed day, and I suppose I should have known that when I woke up this morning. I'm a little surprised that it begins with folks claiming a point of order against unfunded mandates that they're not at all sure exist in the bill. That they claim a point of order against unfunded mandates and a rule that waives those points of order if they did exist. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, I'm a big proponent of regular order. Big proponent of regular order. And the prophylactic waiver that is in the rule is designed just in case there was something we missed. But what's important is that we had the largest and most open debate we'd had in this House in a decade on H.R. 1, the only provision that could possibly have an unfunded mandate in it, and does not. Now, this bill does two things. The underlying legislation does two things. It both gives the Senate an opportunity to come out from under its paralyzing inaction and pass H.R. 1, and it says that if the Senate does not, if the Senate fails to act, we're not asking the Senate to do exactly what we want them to do, we're asking them to act. If they fail to act, that Congress will not get paid. Congress will not get paid. My colleagues on the left won't get paid, my colleagues on the right won't get paid, and my colleagues in the Senate won't get paid. And I would yield 15 seconds to my good friend Mr. Ellison to ask, do you believe that this provision that will prevent us from getting paid for not doing our job is the unfunded mandate in that provision?
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized. 15 seconds.
I believe that the Republican no-jobs agenda is a serious affront to the American people.
Well, let me reclaim my time, Madam Speaker, to say that I appreciate the gentleman's support for making sure we don't get paid if we're not doing our work. There's a divide in this town, Madam Speaker. There's a crowd that believes the government creates jobs, and the more government activity that takes place, the more jobs there are. There's another crowd in this town that believes that only the private sector can create jobs. And as this bill will put more capital into the private markets, it will create jobs. As this bill will provide much-needed certainty that we cannot have under these continuing resolutions, this bill will create jobs. As this bill goes to complete the work that should have happened last Congress but did not, this bill will create jobs. It is a cruel April Fool's Day joke on the American people, Madam Speaker, that instead of debating the underlying resolution, and I have a rule that I'm prepared to bring to the floor that will allow time to debate the underlying resolution, we are instead focused on points of order that even my colleagues on the left don't believe exist. They accuse us of perverting the process, Madam Speaker, and we have had the most open process in the first 90 days of this Congress that this Congress has seen in a decade, and in doing so, they pervert the process, raising points of order that they do not believe exist, and they know in their hearts do not exist. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Minnesota.
2 minutes for the gentlelady from Maryland, Congresswoman Donna Edwards.
Gentlewoman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the gentleman from Minnesota for raising this point of order. I join in support of the point of order. First of all, it's time for us to create jobs, and we haven't created jobs. We're 13 weeks into this Congress, and we're not debating jobs today. Second, as to the underlying resolution, I'll speak to that later, Madam Speaker, but today we're sitting here with a bill that violates the rules of this House. The Congress said when they took on this new leadership that they were going to come into the Congress open and transparent and without hypocrisy and not following the kind of rules that they railed against during the previous Congress. And yet here we are today with a rule that doesn't allow us to really consider appropriations in the way that this Congress, not a last Congress, but this Republican Congress established. We're neither open, we're not transparent, and this point of order raises a question as to whether the Republican majority is going to operate according to the rules that it set. Not the rules that Democrats set, but the rules that Republicans set. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm really troubled today both by the underlying resolution and by the fact that we have here perhaps a bill that has unknown, unfunded mandates that we aren't able to look at and for which there won't be any amendments. And so I thank the gentleman from Minnesota for raising the point of order, and I would urge strong consideration by my colleagues to make this process, as the leadership has committed, to make it open, to make it transparent, and to make it without hypocrisy. And with that, I yield.
For 15 seconds for a question.
You control the time, sir.
Well, yeah, I'll be willing to yield to the gentleman. Thank you for that reminder. Would you be amenable to strip out all but the member pay issue that's contained within the bill? Will you be willing to do that?
You want to remove the most debated provision we've had in this entire Congress because it hasn't been debated enough?
We'll deal with the member pay issue. You willing to do that?
Right. The member pay issue is critically tied to the inaction of the folks on the funding bill.
Reclaiming my time.
The answer is no, Ms. Felton. I cannot agree to that.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you for finally getting around to that no. Well, I think that makes the point here, Madam Speaker. The fact is that this particular Republican action, yet another opportunity to degrade and take away the basic social safety net of America while doing nothing to get Americans back to work. Americans deserve to work. Americans thought that they were going to get a majority that would help them get back to work back last November. But they were sorely surprised when the Republican majority got in and decided to do nothing to help Americans get back to work. And all the majority has got in here to do is to strip away programs and things that will help Americans do better, to take programs and money away from police officers, to fire public employees. This has been their agenda, and this is too bad. And I think that this is a shame, and it certainly is an abandonment of what people thought they were getting in November. And so, Madam Speaker, this particular point of order raised today does address critical issues that must be addressed, but at the bottom, we're still looking at 13 weeks with no jobs and Republicans offering legislation that literally would put nearly 1 million people out of work. And so I asked my colleagues to vote in a moment. So I asked my colleagues to stand with the American people. Let's move America forward. Let's reject the rule and the underlying bill by voting no on this motion to consider this unconstitutional Washington trickery. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to a gentleman who's making sure we do keep our promises on Capitol Hill, the gentleman from California, Chairman Lundgren.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just arise to speak to a question that has been raised during this discussion, that is the provision dealing with the pay of members of Congress and the President of the United States. The Senate had sent over us a bill which purported to deny pay to the President of the United States and to the Congress on a permanent basis for any time that lapsed during which there was not authorization for appropriations for the conduct of government activities. It is on its face blatantly unconstitutional, violating the section of the Constitution that deals with the presidential pay and specifically the 27th Amendment to the Constitution, which does not allow us to do that. The intent, as expressed by the author of the bill before us, in the statement of the constitutional authority, makes it clear that we recognize the limits of the action that we can take, and instead we would, in this way, command those payments not to be made during the period of time in which there is inaction by the President and the Congress of the United States, thereby making a very serious and good faith attempt to put that pressure on the members of Congress and the President of the United States, but in a constitutional way. And so members should be aware of the difference between the language contained in this provision before us and that which was sent over here by the Senate, which on its face both constitutional scholars have looked at it here on the House side and the Senate side, and the White House have suggested that bill that came over from the Senate would not stand up to constitutional examination. This is an attempt on our side to try and provide that action, if demanded by members of Congress, in a way that would be rendered constitutional. And so at least I wanted to make sure that as we debate this point of order, the rule and the bill, that it is clear what the intention of the author is in this case and why we are attempting to follow constitutional procedures.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume to thank the chairman for that explanation, because constitutional principles are paramount, are absolutely paramount on this side of the aisle, and so is accountability. So is accountability for our actions here in this body and our actions across the way. And I could not be more pleased to be a co-sponsor of the underlying resolution because it does hold us accountable and says no work, no pay. No work, no pay. It's April Fool's Day here in the House of Representatives and across the country. We're talking about jobs every day. Every day in this body we're talking about jobs, and yet the debate this morning is focused on, are we doing enough debating about a bill that has already been the most aggressively debated bill this Congress has seen in over a decade? I want to invite my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and in the United States Senate to join me as a co-sponsor of H.R. 25. H.R. 25 is the fair tax bill. It's the only bill in Congress that eliminates every single corporate loophole, exception, lobbyist-inserted provision. Not a one survives the fair tax. It's the only bill in Congress that eliminates the payroll tax, that largest tax that 80% of Americans pay. You want to talk about American families and their pain? Let's talk about the largest tax that American families pay. It's the payroll tax, and H.R. 25 is the only bill in the United States House of Representatives that eliminates the payroll tax in favor of a flat-rate personal consumption tax that ceases to punish productivity and begins to reward those activities that build jobs in this country. It's the only bill in Congress that puts American manufacturing on a level playing field with the rest of the world. Do you want to talk about jobs or do you not? Do you want to get America back on track or do you not? Because this is a point of order that we know doesn't exist. It's a point of order just designed to fill the airwaves first thing in the morning. If you want to fill the airwaves, fill it with promises of jobs. Fill it with promises of ending the tax code that drives jobs out of this country and bringing in that capital that we so desperately need. Again, Madam Speaker, there are no unfunded mandates in this bill. This has been the most aggressively debated bill that this Congress has seen in a generation, I would argue. And the only two things the underlying legislation does, it forces the government to stay open with funding levels, those funding levels provided in H.R. 1 if the Senate passes this bill, and it insists that no work in Congress receives no pay. 40 days we've waited on the Senate to act. They've defeated two bills, but they've passed nothing, Madam Speaker. They've passed nothing. If you want to talk about jobs, if you want to talk about certainty, you have to bring a proposal to the table. This is a freshman proposal that reaches out to try to do something to make things happen. I don't know how you guys break log jams in this city. Clearly it's not easy. Last year it was a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, Democratic White House, and you still couldn't get a budget passed. You still couldn't get appropriations bills passed. So clearly log jams are complicated things. I'm not here to assign blame for those log jams. I'm here to offer solutions. Over and over and over again you see folks rising here to offer solutions. Madam Speaker, with that I ask that you overrule that point of order and allow us to get to the underlying bill.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. The question is, will the House now consider the resolution? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. Question of consideration.
I demand the yeas and the nays.
Gentlemen, the yeas and nays have been requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
Well, before debate can get underway on what's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act, Democrats have raised a procedural point of order against the bill, saying that House rules have been violated in the presentation of this bill. So that's the initial debate there with Keith Ellison and Rob Woodall. Voting on that point of order now, a 15-minute vote to start off the day here on the House floor. The bill itself will get an hour of general debate. Peter Kasperwitz writes in The Hill that that bill would attempt to pass H.R. 1, that's the Republican spending bill for fiscal year 2011, into law should the Senate not approve any 2011 spending bill by next Wednesday. He writes it would also prevent members of Congress from being paid and the President during a shutdown. But he writes the bill is largely seen as a symbolic attempt by Republicans to absolve themselves from blame should a shutdown occur. House passage of the bill does not turn H.R. 1 into law, as the Senate has not acted on the bill and is not expected to. And of course that shutdown looms. It's 1 week until the current short-term federal spending extension expires. This is the sixth short-term extension. It will expire next Friday, April the 8th. Meanwhile, negotiations continue on the 2011 spending for the remainder of the year. We got an update on where things stand from this morning's Washington Journal.
Anna Palmer is with us. She is the House leadership reporter for Roll Call. Ms. Palmer, thanks for starting out Friday morning with us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start with where things stand? What do you know about the state of negotiations at this point?
Sure. Well, publicly, at least, as you kind of read the headlines, you have a real posturing from the Speaker that is saying that no deal is imminent. However, what we are hearing is that a deal is close. They're looking at kind of zeroing in on this $33 billion in cuts, and that the sticky issue right now is still the policy waivers, whether or not those riders are going to be in the final deal.
And explain what the policy riders do.
Sure. And particularly for conservative House Republicans, this is a very big deal. Even where the number might be a little bit negotiable, the policy riders are very important. These are issues like defunding National Public Radio, defunding Planned Parenthood, and things such as that.
Well, you say the number might be negotiable, but how negotiable is the number for Tea Party supporters who brought some of the 87 freshmen to the House?
Sure. I think yesterday there was in the Capitol, or right outside the Capitol, there was a rally, and they were saying, you know, cut it or shut it was the kind of refrain. So for them, there's not a lot of wiggle room here. And when you talk to conservative Republicans, you know, 129 of them voted for the last short-term spending bill that was, you know, that went to the president, and it's very unlikely that Boehner will be able to get them to support a package if there's only $33 billion in cuts.
Well, then explain your headline, because another meeting that happened, this one behind closed doors, was a meeting with the Speaker and the freshman members yesterday. Your headline, Freshmen Place Faith in Boehner.
I think when talking to freshmen coming out of that meeting, they feel like leadership is listening to them. Boehner did not give them any more details, though, about kind of where the final number was or what the negotiation tactics were. However, I think because they feel like he and the rest of the GOP leadership team has been open and kind of keeping them in the loop, they're giving him the benefit of the doubt so far.
And what kind of pressure is on the Speaker right now?
He is in a tough position. I think what you're seeing is, you know, a looming deadline, midnight April 8th, for a government shutdown. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. I think the sentiment that we keep, you know, kind of getting towards is there's a deal that is going to come out probably close to the deadline, and you know, Boehner has a tough line to find in terms of, you know, being able to appease the conservatives, but also find a number that Senate Democrats and President Barack Obama will sign into law.
And that number seems to be $33 billion.
So far, that's the number that everybody's, you know, kind of talking about.
Well, thanks for bringing us up to date. Anna Palmer covers the leadership for Roll Call. You can find her at rollcall.com. Thanks for starting our morning off for us.
Thanks a lot.
And the issue of 2011 spending still on the House floor today. They're going to debate the bill that's being called the Government Shutdown Prevention Act. A point of order was raised by Democrats against the bill, saying that House rules are being violated by the bill being brought to the floor. And the vote we're seeing here is a vote on that point of order. The bill itself will get an hour of general debate. Also today, the House is going to finish up work on the 4-year extension of FAA programs and policies. There are 5 amendment votes pending, and there's the final passage vote, of course. So a 15-minute vote on the House floor. Now, arguing for the Republicans during that point of order debate, Rob Woodall of Georgia, who is also a guest this morning on Washington Journal. He joined us to talk about the overall debate on federal spending with 1 week to go until the current short-term spending bill expires. We're going to show you part of that conversation from this morning while this vote continues.
On your screen right now, Congressman Rob Woodall, Republican of Georgia. He's a member of the 87-strong freshman Republican class in the House of Representatives, but not a newcomer to Capitol Hill. Tell people about your experience before getting elected.
Well, I'd been the chief of staff for the member who served before John Linder. He was actually my mentor. And he just decided, as folks should, that he'd done all he could do, and it was time for him to go spend more time with his grandchildren. And when he announced his retirement, we had a lot of folks put their name in the ring to replace him. No shortage of good conservatives in the great state of Georgia. But folks weren't focused on 2 issues that were really passionate to me. One is the fair tax, and one is constituent service. So about a year ago, I announced that I was going to toss my hat in the ring. I had a fantastic campaign. Had a great debate among the 8 of us Republicans in the primary, and then on to the general, and lo and behold, the folks picked me to serve them, and I have been grateful and enjoyed every day since.
Mr. Woodall is a member of the Budget Committee, and as we've been telling you, the Budget Committee is set to bring out its budget blueprint next week, so maybe we'll squeak out a few details here from the table. Before we leave, that biography, let me ask you, you've had such a long time to observe what it's like to be a member. Is it any different when you actually have the voting card?
Well, it's a lot different. Number one, it's easier to give free advice than it is to assimilate free advice. That's something folks don't always appreciate. But more importantly, it's an obligation now to serve. Staff has an important job to serve, but I really feel the weight of succeeding for folks back home. A lot of people put their trust in me. They didn't have to, and they did. And the wonderful burden to succeed for them is felt every day.
Well, tell us about your district. How many people in it, and what's the unemployment rate right now?
Yeah, I have one of the largest districts in the country. We have 920,000 people now. I'm going to have to lose about 250. This district's going to have to lose about 250,000 in the next redistricting. Our economy is doing better than most, though two of the counties in Georgia with the largest foreclosure rates are in my district. It's the northern suburbs of Atlanta heading on out towards Athens. So we've located several new international headquarters in our area, but what we get to hear during those discussions is how tough it is to grow a job in America these days. In fact, I was sitting down with a CEO just last week who said, Rob, I'm trying to leave. I'm trying to move my company out of the country because it just doesn't pay to hire Americans any longer. And that's unfortunate.
That's Georgia 7 that Mr. Woodall represents. We're going to get to calls from him in a few minutes because we're going to continue this discussion about priorities for federal spending and what the budget should look like coming out of these big debates on Capitol Hill. So let's start with the current negotiations over the continuing resolution, the funding for this year. Seeds of a compromise when you're reading behind the headlines in all the papers this morning. Where are you on what number you're comfortable with?
Well, for me, it's not about numbers. It's about commitments I've made back home. I've made a commitment to cut as much as we possibly can. $100 billion was my number, not because I chose it, but because the leadership chose it for us in the Pledge to America. And I want to come through for folks, but I understand we control 1/2 of 1/3 of the government. It's not just about dollars. There's some important policy riders in there. We're talking about creating jobs. Certainly, cutting federal spending and getting us out of the borrowing business is going to free up capital to create jobs. But so, too, is repealing some of the regulatory burden that's out there. And that was an important part of H.R. 1 for me. But what's so frustrating, Susan, I'm a newcomer to sitting in this chair, is I was so proud to be a part of that H.R. 1 experience. I mean, it was truly Congress at work in the way that I believe the Founding Fathers intended it to work. Democrat amendments were winning, Democrat amendments were losing. Republican amendments were winning, Republican amendments were losing. We were on the floor, around the clock, talking with each other about where to go next. And so here we are. You talk about seeds of negotiation. I still haven't seen a Senate proposal, and I haven't seen a Senate proposal because there is no Senate proposal. I don't know a lot about negotiating in this town, but I do know that if I knew where the other folks were, I know exactly where we are. It'd be easier for me to make some decisions about how it is we ought to come together.
A couple Fridays ago, we were here talking about the resolution on public radio, and I'm wondering, you ended up breaking ranks and deciding to not support the leadership plan to defund public radio. Two things I wanted to show you. First of all, this morning in the newspaper, Bill Moyers may come back from retirement for a new show on PBS. I'm wondering what you think about the timing of that, given that this debate is not settled, and then explain your vote.
Well, we've got two things going on. Whether we're talking about NPR, whether we're talking about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, for me, these aren't decisions about whether these are important programs or even good programs. It's a question of we're borrowing every dollar to pay for those programs from our children and our grandchildren, and so is it so important that we need to burden our children with those expenses? And in my opinion, it's not. H.R. 1 defunded all of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I was proud to cast a vote in support of that. NPR was a little different last week. You know, the burden of responsibility when you control the House of Representatives is a big one, and John Boehner has done a wonderful job of letting the House work its will. I sit on the Rules Committee as well, and we have had more amendments, more of an open process in the first 90 days of this Congress than we had in the previous 4 years combined. And that's an amazing thing to think about. John Boehner has the power to shut the whole process down and force a Republican agenda through, a conservative agenda through, but he doesn't use it. He lets the House work its will so that under the belief, the sincere belief that he has that we will get a better work product if we all participate. That NPR vote last week was an exception to that. It came up very quickly. It moved to the floor very quickly, and I just think that we can do better. Just because we can move something quickly doesn't mean we should move something quickly. And that vote against it was certainly not a vote in favor of funding National Public Radio. It was a vote in favor of allowing the House to work its will and have an open process. And I think that's one of our jobs as freshmen, is to say, you know what, all of these wonderful aspirations that this new Congress has about how to lead, we want to make sure we stick to those, even when it's easy to move away, and that's where we came.
Okay, so I'd like to have any comments, if you have, on the idea of Bill Moyers coming back on PBS. I want to just show you one thing from Elizabeth Jensen's article here this morning. Bill Moyers' retirement from weekly television last year may not last long. He's received preliminary approval for a major grant to return to PBS with a half-hour show with the working title Something Different with Bill Moyers. The Carnegie Corporation of New York, in an announcement on this week on its website, and then in parens, the release has since been changed to remove references to Mr. Moyers. Said its board had voted to give Mr. Moyers' production company a $2 million 29-month grant for the show.
Well, you make exactly my point as someone who would defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Susan, which is Bill has a wonderful product to bring to the table, and there are folks who want to finance that product. Is there a role for federal seed money? Sure there is, but in today's fiscal climate, when we already have $14 trillion in debt and it looks like we're going to add another $7 under the President's proposal over the next 10 years, there's no way to justify that to the young people in my life.
All right, last question from me now before we get to calls. Today, the Congress is set to debate H.R. 1255 to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States. And this suggests that if the deadline is not reached, that H.R. 1 would become law. What's the point of this resolution today, which has little chance of actually succeeding?
Well, I'm sorry to hear you describe it that way,
Well, not in
Susan.
the floor, but I mean, it would have to pass the Senate and then be signed into law by the President, and they're not likely to do that, correct?
Well, you say that, and you could be right. You've studied the Senate a lot more than I have. If you look back at the front page of that resolution, you'll see it's two freshmen who are sponsoring it, and I'm one of them. And so it's something that I believe very passionately about. I don't know why the Senate hasn't been able to act, right? We went through a marathon session of this open process that, again, that I thought was the very best of what America has to offer. The Senate's defeated two bills, but they haven't passed anything. And what this resolution says is two things, and they're both very important. Number one, it says if the Senate, for whatever reasons I don't understand, can't pass anything, we're going to let them off the hook during these negotiations and just put H.R. 1 into effect as the baseline while we continue our business, because we don't want the government to shut down. Perhaps the Senate does. We don't want that to happen. And so this bill says if you can't agree on something, let's just use this as the baseline until we can hammer out a different agreement. And number two, it says, and this is very important, if you can't get your job done, you've got one job, and that's to fund the government. You should have done it last year. You didn't. You still aren't doing it this year. And so if you can't get your work done, you don't get paid. And not just you don't get paid in the Senate because you're not doing your work, but I'm not going to get paid in the House either. For Pete's sakes, we have a responsibility, not a constitutional responsibility, to fund this government. And if we can't perform that very basic, fundamental constitutional responsibility, we don't deserve a nickel of our salaries, and I hope the folks on the Senate side agree with me about that. So I'm very excited to see this resolution come to the floor today, and I do hope, again, I'm trying everything that I can to inch the process forward. I don't know what it takes to get the Senate to act. I don't know what it's like to only control 1/3 of the government, but we as a freshman class are doing everything we can to be a part of the solution instead of a part of the problem. Say what you want to about the prospects for this resolution. It's at least an alternative, and again, I think a step in the right direction.
Okay, well, let's see what our viewers have to say. And if you're interested in the text of that bill, we've posted it on our website. And what time are you expecting the debate to get underway? Because you still have FAA to work on.
We're going to go into the rule to bring this bill to the floor at 9 a.m. Then we'll go out and work on FAA throughout the day, and then we'll come back to this debate at the end.
And any idea of when a vote on it might happen?
My best guess, about 2:30 this afternoon.
Okay, thank you for that. For our C-SPAN House watchers in the audience, you've got the inside skinny on how the debate will play out today. Let's get to calls for Congressman Rob Woodall of Georgia, beginning with Cleveland. This is Karen, who is a Democrat. Karen, good morning to you. You're on.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to mention a little bit that that everybody knows that the real money, we're not even going to go with Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, the real money that goes out really is to corporations, it's the subsidies, it's the tax breaks, it's to overseas, the way they're taking the jobs overseas, and then somehow they get paid for that. They're allowed to bring those products that they make cheaper over there. They're allowed to bring them back here and sell them here. There's all kinds of stuff that could be done that way. We all know it. Nobody's brave enough to touch on that. We're talking billions. We're not talking 100 million. We're talking billions of dollars that go to corporations, that go to tax subsidies. We know that this has all been mishandled for 30, 40 years. Everybody knows that. And for anyone to be picking on school children's lunch programs and all this other silly stuff, it's just silly stuff. This is what our tax money is paid for. It's for services. It's for, to make our lives better. It's the real money that we could get is in corporations, and nobody's willing to touch it because it all funds your guys' campaigns.
Karen, let me jump in so the Congressman can answer. Thank you so much.
I got to tell you, Karen, I actually agree with you. Now, I'll tell you, I ran one of the least expensive campaigns in the country, even though I was in an 8-way primary, because I believe it's folks like you on the ground in a grassroots way that make a campaign. It's not big dollar contributions, and I'm very proud of that. But more importantly, Karen, I agree with you about those corporate subsidies. I agree with you about those corporate loopholes. And not only is someone out there brave enough to take that on, that someone's me. I have introduced the only proposal in Congress that eliminates every single corporate loophole, tax break, special lobbyist inserted provision, and that bill is called the Fair Tax. It's H.R. 25, and I would encourage you to look at it. Not only have I introduced it, but it is the single most widely co-sponsored tax reform bill in the House and in the Senate. Will special interests be too powerful for us to move that bill forward? I don't know. But if you will support that back in Cleveland, it's going to be a grassroots effort. There's no appetite in Washington for doing away with all these tax breaks and exemptions, because if we get to offer those, whether they're to corporations or to you as a family, we get to manipulate behavior. In the Fair Tax, what I say is the government shouldn't be manipulating behavior, and in doing so, we're driving those companies overseas, as you've suggested. We're driving those jobs overseas and turning this into an import nation. So please take a look at H.R. 25. Again, I agree with you 100%, and I'll be supporting legislation to do away with all of those loopholes.
Austin, Arkansas. Kern, Republican. Good morning.
Yes, sir. Mr. Woodall, I admire your a program of trying to do these cuts, but until such time that you can convince the American people, especially that 50% that doesn't understand that we're broke. This country is flat broke. We do not have any money. You all need to go on TV, rent some time, and explain to the people that we do not have any money left. Until such time, you're never going to have any unity in cutting the budget or anything else. You need to get that one program across and follow the Constitution. That's what all of you raised your right hands for to uphold and defend. Thank you.
Well, that's just so important. It's so important, and I hope folks paid close attention to that. When we talk about cutting a program in Washington, D.C., and NPR is a good example of that, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not NPR is a worthy thing to fund. What it has to do with is it the responsibility of the federal government to fund it? And you hit on two very important points. If it's not the constitutional responsibility of the federal government to fund it, we need to get out of that business. We need to get out of that business because it's the constitutionally right thing to do. But even if it's the constitutionally right thing to fund a program, you've got to ask the question, is it worth borrowing from our children to make that purchase? Sometimes the answer is going to be yes, but you hit the nail right on the head with a $14 trillion debt. That's the entire federal budget for more than 3 years. We could shut down everything for 3 full years and we still wouldn't be able to pay back our debt. In fact, we could shut down for 4 years and we wouldn't be able to pay back our debt. The problem is monumental, and not only do I need to speak more about it, you need to speak more about it back home. We have to get people focused on the seriousness of the problem. We're so accustomed as a country to kicking the can down the road. Too many people think that's where we are now. Right now, we're headed towards that day of reckoning, and that day is coming very soon.
Boston, Jim, Democrat. Good morning. You're on for Congressman Woodall.
Good morning. I think it's what is proposed in the tax increases that's the bad thing. Why not increase military taxes, or reduce the military rather, and bring our old World War II bases from Europe and Asia, bring them home, bring these people home, save that money. And I understand the great state of Georgia is going to start taxing Girl Scout cookies and tax the blind. I mean, come on, there's got to be some people of wealth in Georgia that you can get some money from instead of taking it from the poor. Thank you.
Jim, these are exactly the challenges that we're facing. I'll tell you two things. Number one, you called in on the Democrat line, but you sound like a freshman Republican. We are taking on defense spending. Nothing is exempt. In fact, H.R. 1, our continuing resolution for the rest of the bill, for the rest of the year, went right after defense spending and made defense spending a part of those reductions. Nothing gets off the hook when we're looking at making budget decisions. Everybody has to participate. And I'll tell you this, it's not anti-American to suggest those defense cuts. I have military men and women every day come up to me and say, Rob, for Pete's sakes, I have my life on the line for this country. If you think I don't want to participate in saving it from economic collapse, you're mistaken. If I'm willing to put my life on the line for it overseas, you better believe I'm willing to put my livelihood on the line for it back home. That's how serious these decisions are. Biggest national security threat to our country is our increasing debt. But as it goes to taxes, I will say to you that we all ought to be in the game. Why is it that we might tax Keebler cookies, but we're not going to tax Girl Scout cookies? We all have a responsibility to be involved in funding the government. Right now, we have 50% of Americans paying 100%.
The ayes are 219. The noes are 172. The question of consideration is decided. The question of consideration is decided in the affirmative. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose the gentleman from Georgia rise? The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield.